Welcome to the next session of CS ASEAN conference, which focuses on e-payment and looking to address the question whether ASEAN can transform into a cashless society. E-payment is one of the key segments of Fintech, which has witnessed a lot of interest over the last 5 years, and various governments in the region have been supporting of it as they view it as a broader means for financial inclusion. To discuss this interesting topic, we have with us an experienced panel. Let me introduce the panel first. So we have Valerie Wagoner from Gopay. She's the Chief Growth Officer. Valerie joined Gopay in August 2019, and she leads Gopay's overall strategy and execution of business growth. Valerie has over 17 years of experience in launching and scaling products and tech companies. Second, we have with us Olano. He is the Chief Financial Officer at Mynt. Mynt is the leading fintech company in the Philippines. He took over the role of CFO in March 2020, and before that, he held various senior positions in Globe Telecom. And finally, we have with us Varun Mittal from EY. Varun is the partner and global emerging market fintech leader at EY. He is responsible for driving EY's fintech business across 130 emerging markets in the globe. I want to thank all the panelists for their time and look forward to their valuable insights into the subject. So the format of the session is such that there will be 5 minutes opening remarks, followed by Q&A. The participants can ask Q&A by sending their question at the email address mentioned on your screen, which is asean.conference@creditsuisse.com. Now I'll pass on the mic to Valerie Wagoner for her opening remarks. Valerie, over to you.
Thanks, Varun, and thanks so much to everyone who's dialing in. As Varun mentioned, I joined Gopay in 2019 and feel grateful to have come back from Silicon Valley again back to Asia and joined at this time, because especially not only is the mission of what we're building at Gopay so important, but it's even more important given the circumstances of the pandemic and everything we're all battling together globally this year. So when I step back, Gopay is working and aspires to work even more deeply across the region, but Indonesia is, of course, our primary market where we're focused. And really, ultimately, what we're trying to do at Greater Gopay is bring the what is 94 million unbanked people in Indonesia into the banking system and better serve the 47 million people who are underbanked. Indonesia is the fourth largest unbanked nation in the world, and so there's so much impact that we can create and business value that we can create in bringing access to better financial services to those tens of millions of people. So what we fundamentally do is provide both consumers and especially merchants and small merchants the ability to make transactions digitally. And that is, of course, better for creating more business value for small merchants who are the lifeblood of the economy and people's incomes in the market. So 97% of our merchants who accept GoPay payments in Indonesia are micro SMEs. And of those 74% have reported, from a study from the University of Indonesia, have reported actually increased sales and new customers after accepting GoPay. So that's a real testament to not only the consumer convenience and ease and better experience of using digital payments instead of cash, but also the impact on small businesses who are really trying to grow and sustain and thrive. So this, especially in 2020, as is not surprising to anyone, some of our payments business has seen a great uplift, and some has seen great headwinds and kind of suppression. So of course, any kind of payments volumes in transportation or offline, especially during lockdowns in Indonesia, really fell off a cliff, quite frankly, as people were not moving around and not dining out and not shopping in offline retail shops. But at the same time, the delivery services, say food delivery or grocery delivery, or of course any e-commerce purchases outside of the Gojek ecosystem, or all of us know we need ever more our gaming apps and our streaming apps and whatnot. So the volumes, we've actually grown volumes nearly triple since 2019, so growing 2.7x in terms of all of our online transaction volumes. And the transportation has basically nearly come back, and offline is of course kind of struggling in fits and starts as lockdowns open and then go back to lockdown again, et cetera. So the most important thing that we've done is really shift focus of helping get those small businesses online. So there's we're lucky to be Gopay obviously is a critical part of being able to process the payments online and help merchants actually make sales. But we're also lucky to be part of the broader Gojek ecosystem that is enabling these small merchants with logistics services and delivery, and also with overall customer acquisition and getting visibility in front of customers that they wouldn't have had otherwise. So the big adoption of kind of the broader Gojek and GoBiz suite of services, including accepting GoPay payments online, has really been an important part of how we've helped small enterprises survive and thrive during the crisis, and help serve our consumers better as well. So this year has been really an acceleration of where we of pulling forward and accelerating our speed towards our longer term vision around moving businesses online. But we also are now going into 2021 really looking forward to expanding our strategy beyond just e-money and really becoming a true wallet and the hub of spend for users. So while we have till date been an e-money store of value for consumers, or they're loading money in and then being able to make digital payments, we know that that's not the ideal store of value. And really consumers should be able to manage their money across different accounts, whether they're bank accounts or lines of credit or other financial instruments. And into 2021, we're going to push even harder on how to really help users manage across their many different accounts and be truly a wallet to them and not just an e-money account.
Thank you, Valerie. Thanks for the opening remarks. Ek, if you can comment on the situation and business in Philippines.
Thank you, Varun. I guess if the question is whether Philippines can transform into a cashless society, setting the context on the Philippine environment is a critical path. In our country, there's a very large opportunity and a challenge to increase financial awareness, to increase access to financial services. 2/3 of the population are unbanked. 40% of the population do not have an access to a bank. And less than 5% have access to investments and insurance products in the country. And you overlay that with what we see on the digital front, right? You have 100 million population, over 100 million population. SIM penetration is ubiquitous to population. A lot of people are on smartphones. 65% or over 65% are on smartphones. You have a lot of people that are digitally savvy, and it opens up an opportunity where technology can serve as a platform to address financial inclusion in the country. And that has never been truer in this sense than what happened during the pandemic. The various forms of quarantines and lockdowns that were in place in 2020. People who never thought of using GCash before suddenly needed it urgently. So we see as a number one financial services platform in the country, we have seen significant growth in registrations. We currently have over 33 million registered users in the platform, roughly a third of the population, 10 times growth in monthly active users within the year. We built an ecosystem of around 600,000 merchants, and as Valerie said, this includes your social merchants, which are micro SMEs that have transitioned from your brick and mortar or offline stores to more digitally savvy type of selling services. And we've enabled over 1 trillion pesos worth of transactions across the year. What's pretty nice to look at is we've actually seen the average transactions per users increase significantly over the year. Every active user now uses the app twice in a day, and with up to over 7 million logins at the highest peak. And this is and to put that into context, this serves as an opportunity to further grow financial inclusion in the country. And we're a first mover in that space. We provide accessible financial services on app, and we have services across savings, where we offer the best deposit rate in the country. We have investments, providing ability to invest in funds for as low as $1. We provide credit, providing access to credit lines for deferred payments. And we have basically dispersed over 8 billion pesos worth of credit to date. And we recently launched insurance as well on app through partnerships with Singlife, offering micro insurance, small ticket insurance to cover for dengue, for COVID in that space. Today on the app, almost a third of the active users have basically used our financial services platform. And in that way, it allows us to look at it, to look at the space and gear ourselves into what our regulators have been harping about in terms of converting more and more people into the digital ecosystem. That in that way, that's basically what GCash is as a business. But what we've done over the past year has been more than more than business. We've been a vital member of the Philippine community. One of our proudest moments during this pandemic was we basically helped the Philippine government disperse over 16 billion pesos worth of social aid into over 2 million Filipino beneficiaries across the local government units as well as the social welfare department. We've been able to raise close to 40 million pesos worth of donations across, and as you may or may not know, that the Philippines was hit not just by COVID but by different disasters in the past months, coming from strong typhoons, and we've been able to raise significant amounts of money across our donation platform to be able to aid in the community as well. So in essence, in 2020, as Valerie earlier mentioned, it's an acceleration of adoption on the digital space. It's a year where you see GCash show unprecedented growth. But more than this, we also take pride in the fact that we've been able to make contributions in society, or in making lives of Filipinos, the individual Filipinos, easier and safer.
Thank you, Dick. Varun, if you can just provide a comment on the region, what you're seeing in terms of the payment market.
So as Val and Tech shared, the COVID actually created a lot of force for people to adopt. And for a good 4 months, everybody was nudged to accept it. And that literally got both a lot of consumers and a lot of merchants accepted a lot of these things. In a lot of places where you had banks as acquirers or provider for this, the banks had a lot of government push to issue QR-based payment acceptance, or they had to relax the way they would accept a merchant to come on board. So that level of massive government push was one of another key instrumental factors. But beyond that, one thing which I see as a generational shift has been the power of the local switches. The governments in each of the markets have gone really behind supporting the local debit switches, whether it's PayNow in Singapore, Instapay in the Philippines, Linkaja, GPN related offerings in Indonesia, Do It in Malaysia. The fact of going after that for local needs, we need local payment solutions, which are not looking at hefty international cost structures. And the premise is a lot of these local instruments do not carry a lot of those similar buyer-seller protections, but for those high-frequency, low-value transactions, you necessarily do not need a lot of those bells and whistles. So the huge shift has been around that, the kind of use cases which have been built, the push for non-banks to get access to that infrastructure to create next generation of use cases, wherein you have localized solutions for local needs built by local companies, leveraging the national infrastructure. That for me has been the biggest takeaway. And that is something which will define how the cashless journey is going to be in the next 3 to 4 years.
Thank you, Varun. So I think all of you have touched COVID, but obviously it's a pandemic which has got far-reaching implications. So I think there have been a lot of queries on that front. So Valerie, if you can elaborate a little bit more, as you mentioned that Gojek's main businesses was disrupted. So how do you see in general in Indonesia, when you look at Gopay or it has impacted digital payment adoption overall besides the ride hailing? And did you guys expand the use cases for the wallet during the pandemic? So any color on that will be helpful. And lastly, if in the same thing, if you can provide, do you think if it has accelerated, as you mentioned early, this is sustainable, the habit they're seeing from consumers is sustainable?
Yep. I think despite some of the major use cases like transportation and offline payments being held back by the pandemic situation, similar to what Tech mentioned, the average usage for any given user actually increased because there's just such a clear value proposition for using. It's like saying, will people continue to buy online after the pandemic? Of course they will, and therefore they will need to use digital payments, right? So I think that trend absolutely will sustain. But as people shift their behaviors of consumption in general more to online, that will actually also help adoption of and sustained adoption of digital payments in offline scenarios. If you're a user who is, say, doing 100% of your purchases in cash in offline scenarios and not really buying online at all, then when it comes time to, say, hail a Go ride, and pay for an ojek, if you have GoPay balance, you might use GoPay, but if you aren't holding balance because anyway you're doing your other payments in cash, then you're probably going to use cash to pay for that Gojek ride. The greater adoption of those high value use cases like online purchases or ordering ahead to an F&B, to a restaurant and picking up at the counter, right? We made a big push to make sure that more merchants were able to support a pickup use case and of course do a digital payment in advance so food could just be picked up if not even being delivered. So it's more cost effective for the customer, but still safe during the pandemic. That's another kind of use case that just even outside of the pandemic scenario has a ton of convenience in being able to skip the queue. So I think some of these key behavioral changes will sustain because of the pure convenience and pure value to customers. And because some of those key use cases, because those will sustain, users will generally be using digital payments more, will have more GoPay balance more often, and will therefore start using it in additional use cases as well. But I think in terms of new, you also asked about anything new in particular that was launched. I think a big push for, as I mentioned, like getting more the restaurants adopting pickup features. Also, another big one is being able to send money, especially say like during Ramadan. Normally you would visit home, you might give gifts that way. Now, when those occasions to send money to friends or family or to kind of share expenses you're not able to physically do that in cash. We saw a big uptake in usage of those sort of peer-to-peer transactions, but also specifically launch services to support that more. So one was launching the social feed so that you can more easily connect to other people who you want to send money to within your kind of GoPay friend circle. So we launched that relatively recently, and that actually just around last week was actually trending up to number 2 on Twitter in terms of people sending 2021 wishes to each other by sending tiny amounts of GoPay P2P. So that's a use case that has real utility, but also has some delight for in the sort of gift giving. We also saw so in terms of another new use case, being able to do cashless withdrawals. So we launched with BCA, being able to cardless withdrawals, I should say, from ATMs. So among the thousands of ATMs in the BCA network, a user could simply use GoPay, could send money to another person. That person doesn't even have to have a BCA account, but can withdraw from a BCA ATM. So that, of course, is again like high utility, but especially when it's harder to say get to a physical bank branch, or it's harder to physically give cash to other people. That's a feature and a service that we launched during the pandemic and prioritized specifically to respond to these kind of use cases people needed.
Thank you. I think Philippines had one of the most harshest lockdown across the region. So did you see any specific use cases getting popular during the pandemic? And again, same thing, what's your view of how much of this trend is sustainable and what use cases you think will going to last from customer perspective?
In terms of use cases, Varun, I think it's very similar to what Valerie earlier mentioned. We continue to see most use cases grow, but particularly so for several key use cases, like P2P sending is one. We've seen significant growth in terms of P2P sending, not only for purposes of remittance, but also for gifting. It also serves as purpose for e-commerce, for smaller type merchants. These are the micro businesses that are selling sushi bakes or your muffins across different social media platforms, where the payment has to come out through a digital payment platform. And you mentioned it earlier, Valerie. This is one of the key use cases, and we were talking about this offline just a few minutes ago. Christmas in the Philippines is one of the longest holidays in the region, and I think what we've seen is a lot of people are sending Christmas notes saying Merry Christmas, but also including their GCash number into the note, just so when you want to send over a gift, it could come in the form of GCash, right? So P2P is one of the key use cases that have grown. We've seen bank transfers as another use case that grew significantly. In the Philippines, there has been a significant level of hindrance in terms of moving funds from bank to bank. Even when the BSP started to do Instapay in 2 to 3 years back, but with the lockdowns and with the community quarantines, that has been significantly enabled, and GCash has been one of the forefront in terms of bank transfers in the country. We saw a lot of growth in terms of our buy load service as well. When we say buy load, that's the selling of telco credits, telco load to users. And in that particular example, and you know this very well, Varun, most of the use cases in the prepaid market in the Philippines, if you want to load your mobile credit, you go out of your house, walk a few blocks, and load in a retail store just across the corner. With the community quarantine that has shifted a little, that has shifted into a digital payment platform, and GCash has been one of the key contributors in that shift. And lastly, I think the online services, right? Online shopping, e-commerce has been one of the key things that has continued to grow in the country, and we've seen that grow in the GCash platform as well. So generally speaking, we've seen significant growth across most of our use cases, but primarily driven on the online side of the business, which is reflective of digital payment adoption. On your question, Varun, on whether this is sustainable, let me answer that in two ways. One is anecdotal and one is more on views. The anecdotal way, anecdotally, we've seen memes and posts calling GCash as a verb now, right? And in place of digital payment. And the mere fact that it has come to that point where GCash is turning into a verb means that there's the sustainability of the adoption is relatively there. We look at the market today, and this is more of the view, we look at the market today and see adoption in different socioeconomic tiers. On the top tier, there's significant adoption. On the bottom tier, they are users, but we need to convert them into habituation, right? And in so doing, there's still ways to go to kind of to get what you can refer to as true mass adoption. And there's significant challenges along the way where you can see the convince. But from our perspective, the fact that you can do a lot of the other things that you've previously done offline in the comfort of your own home by just clicking a button on your phone. That convenience, that customer experience could potentially trump any backslide in terms of adoption in the country. And I think that says a lot in terms of what we feel could be the sustainability of adoption and the acceleration of the adoption that we've seen.
Thank you, Dick. Varun, quickly, if you can just, I think you touched about it, but any market that stand out during pandemic that you saw accelerated adoption in the ASEAN region, which you want to highlight?
See, so I would say two markets. So Vietnam market, for example, to be very specific, because they were one of the first ones to bounce back from the crisis. So from that perspective, the way they continued the adoption was something which was phenomenal, because in terms of like coming back to normal life, they were the first one. They were the first ones, I would say, and at the most largest scale. But the kind of broader acceptance and continued growth, because rest of the people were forced. Vietnamese embraced it more than they were forced, and that is something which has been, like, I would say, more outlier from that perspective. And the kind of local new ideas, new scenarios, new use cases people have come through, and which is why some of the regional players have actually prioritized spending more energy and resources in that market, because there you see a genuine, I would say, jubilation from the customer to embrace some of these solutions. So for me, that they have been one of the rock stars of this generation.
Thank you, Varun. So I think one of the key other discussion subject has been the regulation, and Varun, if you can comment on this. So last 3 to 5 years, there has been development of real-time payment system across the region, right? Whether it's Instapay in Philippines, whether Pay Now, and whether it's in Thailand, who obviously led with Prompt Pay. So how do you see this real-time payment adoption, or in the next few years, we expect this to increase further, impacting the digital payment landscape in the region? Obviously, we have India as an example to see how it has impacted that market. So how do you see that impacting ASEAN as a region?
So the biggest, so two parts to the real-time payments. When real-time payments are expanding, one part is they're going after high-value use cases where the rewards are not there, where it's a merchant-driven push. So for example, if you want to book a vacation in Singapore, the person will tell you, I will give you $100 discount straight away if you pay with Pay Now instead of any card. So one push is at the high value transactions, which will move towards that. And the other part, which is the other end of the spectrum. So I usually say the middle part stays with the cards. It's the top and the bottom where the real-time payments hit. The bottom part is because the transaction value is so small that the rewards don't matter as much, the card rewards. And the cash comes up with its own pain points. So which is why the high frequency, low value transactions and high value, low frequency. So it's the two extreme ends of the spectrum is where real-time payments have created huge value. And also for the B2B payments, because the reconciliation becomes automated and much more digitized. So those are the two parts. And interestingly, it's the extreme ends of the spectrum where they are successful and they will continue to be successful. Banks would have an incentive to do what they can to maximize the profit pie, because banks in most cases do not make a significant money. I mean, bank would make 1% or at least 40 to 80 basis points on card transactions, but they will make a flat fees on real-time payments. So which is why from a P&L perspective, it's not the most exciting. They still have to do it. So which is why banks are always looking at can we plug in credit and can we plug in all these other solutions on it? And what that has done is created the next generation of the buy now, pay later solutions, because when you can't make money on the interchange, you have to find other ways to make money. So those are, I would say, the key trends, and they will continue to become more stronger as we move further, because it's a specific ends of the market which real-time payments are attacking and are being successful there.
Thanks, Varun. Just on this, but how do you see them impacting the wallet players? Obviously, Philippines is a different story because in Instapay, the bank transfers were an issue and it helped to solve that problem. But generally, like in India, you saw with real-time payment, the wallet business case becoming a little bit challenging. How do you see that happening in ASEAN? Obviously, Indonesia is a bigger market. We don't have real-time here, but other markets which have launched.
So because you see, most of the markets which have real-time payments are actually already opening access to the fintechs. So which is why the wallet use case is if you have a large ecosystem in which people can pay and the money stays in the ecosystem. So even in India, if you look at the wallets which had a large ecosystem where the merchant is able to spend the money and most of the needs of a merchant's life can be met in that ecosystem, that's when the wallets become successful. If the merchant has to end of the day withdraw all the money to his bank account, then wallet becomes a pass-through. And that's when the value starts to decline. But interestingly, across Southeast Asia, we see the wallets are already becoming a much more broader platform. So which is why the merchants on a GoPay platform or a Gcash platform, even for their own daily needs, and I see both of them actually connecting to payroll solutions or gig economy platforms to actually enable the merchant to not. So the key part is this: you have to break that cycle where the merchant has to end of the day pull everything into the bank account. If you break that cycle, then you are successful. Else, the wallets who cannot break that cycle will become dumb pipes. But the wallets who can break that cycle will be the real winners.
Thank you. Very helpful. I think we touched upon it, but how do you think Instapay has impacted the e-payment in Philippines? And also there have been talks about standardized QR code in Philippines. So any update, what is happening on that front?
So Varun, Gcash is the number one sender and actually receiver as well for Instapay flows in the country. We hold roughly around 30% of the total flows that go in and out through Instapay. And we've been able to offer this on a seamless basis. So the transaction flows from bank to bank and the convenience on app despite the fact that this can basically be done on the banking apps as well. So the user experience on GCash plus the and what Varun from EY earlier mentioned, the mere fact that there's a multitude of other things that they can do on the GCash app, not just simply transferring flows from bank to bank, then it allows us as a kind of like a first in mind in terms of bank transfers in the country, and vis-a-vis other fund transfer apps. On your question on standardized QR, I think the goal is to have this completely live within the first half of this year. And from our perspective, despite the fact that we did launch QR very pervasively in over the past several years, we're very supportive of the regulators' thrust towards standardization and towards creating greater financial inclusion. Albeit we sacrifice the proprietary advantage that we had over several years of work. We also recognize that you create the pervasive digital ecosystem, then it brings in more and more people to understand what digital payments is. It creates a little bit more traction in terms of education and converting what we previously said, that the 2/3 of the population that would relatively remain unbanked, that have been relatively remain unbanked and underbanked in the country. So we have reached a certain scale in a way with the network and ecosystem of our QR payments today, but we feel that the benefits of standardizing outweighs trying to fight the system in this way, and in that sense we feel that the impact of creating a bigger chunk of the population into digital payments is an important piece, right? When we talk about the BSP, they've said it publicly that their goal is to convert 50% of the transactions in the country into digital. And as one of the leaders in the industry, it's part of our duty and a part of our vision to be able to enable that. And standardization is one way to get there.
Thank you, Take. Valerie, I think, again, Indonesia, the biggest discussion has been the standardized QR code, which was launched last year early. So if you can provide an update, and how do you see it impacting your proprietary QR code and advantage that you may have had?
Yeah, it's similar to what Tech described, but we're just slightly ahead in that journey because we obviously made that transition this past year, and we're fully supportive of and embrace the standardization because it's really the right thing to do. It's better experience for customers, better experience for merchants, and will just help grow the ecosystem overall. Yes, there is some short-term some cost that we have to just bear or let go of because we similarly, invested over a couple of years in having the largest proprietary network of acceptance on proprietary QR. But that, again, is just a step in the journey of ultimately bringing more people and more businesses into the digital ecosystem. So we're, just responding to it, or have, fully now responded to it and made that conversion and are very, very supportive.
Okay, thank you. I think the other thing is discussion point is always on the competition. So in Philippines, there are two main players, Mynt and PayMaya and GCash. So are you seeing emergence of any new player, and what do you think competitive advantage for you have versus PayMaya?
As with any industry, Varun, that is being brought into spotlight, more and more players would likely look in and say, I wanna take a piece, right? And we've seen that happen over the past year. More and more players have emerged to compete outside of the two players you mentioned. But one of the bright spots in the Philippines is, and it's expected more and more, given the fact that it's one of the bright spots in the Philippine market, it's expected that your various players will try to enter. What we see though is we're still we're way ahead of the industry. When we look at our stats, we are heads above water. Okay, vis-a-vis other players in the industry. We're basically in the likes of competing with global giants like Grab, Netflix, and Spotify in terms of active users in the market today. In terms of competitive advantage, for us, I think there's a couple of things that work in our favor. We've been at this for almost 2 decades now. GCash entered the market in 2004, 2005, way ahead of its time, I know. So if you recall, during back then, there's no smartphone, so everybody has to remember a particular syntax to be able to just send 1 peso to another person, right? But the fact that we've been able to build that allows us to be able to build the history of our data, of the users, and the history of their data. That allows us to build a database where you understand the preference, you understand their risks, you understand their payment history, and in some ways it allows us to build products across scoring, credit scoring as well, and even relevant strategies of going to market. Right? Outside of that, there's also an unfair advantage coming from our shareholders. We're partly owned by Globe, the leading mobile telecoms provider in the country, with over 90 million users on its base, and in a very robust and pervasive network and distribution infrastructure. We were partly owned by Ant Financial, a global force in the payment industry, and has proprietary technology that we can leverage on. And we're also partly owned by Ayala, so which is one of the largest Philippine conglomerates in the country, right? So with combined of all these services are kind of like your pillars for competitive advantage in the country. And we do recognize that there's going to be more competition that could look into the Philippines, given the fact that there's a lot of opportunities in the market. But we feel that having the head start and having the shareholder advantages that we currently have gives us a bit of an edge against any other new player.
Thank you, Dick. Valerie, I think Indonesia is one of the most competitive market, more than I think 75 payment apps in the country as of now. But obviously there are quite a few who are very popular. So how do you see this landscape evolving over the next 2 to 3 years? And what are you clearly focused on to build a competitive edge for Gopay versus some of your peers like OVO and others?
Yeah, and of course we do track, the competitive landscape as it informs some of our decisions. But honestly, we spend 99% of our attention thinking about customers and merchants, and rather than competitors, and that's ultimately who matters most. So the things that we're focused on to really serve our consumers and merchants better are really along 2 key themes going forward. One that I alluded to earlier, which is really being truly more of a wallet and the hub of how to manage your money and manage your spending, and rather than an e-money store value for payments. So that means being able to link to existing accounts that you may hold, bank accounts or credit cards. It means potentially opening up new accounts. That is going to be a long journey into the future, but that's definitely the direction we're going. The news from a couple of weeks ago about our stake in Bank Jago is a first step in that direction, but really kind of being truly evolving as a wallet and being that hub of how users are spending and managing their money. The second aspect of that, which I think is especially important in how, especially I think consumers in many parts of the region, but especially in Indonesia, really want to be able to manage money together. Like, your financial life is not an individual, personal, solo experience. It is part of a household. You are part of a community, a small group. Be it the way that you go out to dinner with the same friends regularly, and sometimes one picks up the check or the other, or be it like how you're managing, spending on groceries for your household with maybe your elderly parents or your kids or your spouse. So this shared management of money is really inherent in the way that people live and work today, and is where they're really, really unserved by the existing products in the market. And really focusing on those customer needs is a big part of how we think about managing money and being the hub of spend in that shared social experiences around your money. So again, like lots more to come on the roadmap along that theme, but the launch of the social feed and that I mentioned in the recent month or two is one step in that direction as well.
Thank you, Valerie. I think the next discussion is obviously on the economics. So I think a lot of people would like to know, how does the economics work? Obviously, MDRs are pretty low. So Varun, starting with you, if you can talk a little bit about the economics, how do you think, where can the money can be made in this business, and what are the sustainable levels for MDR needed?
See, the key thing we have to look at is MDR is just one part of revenue sources. And the merchants are looking for way more services than a vanilla acquiring. They're looking for, can you help me get customers? What can you do for help me bring efficiency to my system? So as we mentioned, right, it's not, the merchant doesn't want somebody who dumps the cash at the end of the, or money at the end of the day to a bank account. Can you help me do reconciliation? Valerie mentioned about, and Tech also mentioned about small merchants selling on social media. So I'm selling on an Insta, a TikTok, of FB. Can you help me reconcile? Can you help me track my orders? Can you help me connect to the shipping players? Can you help me give a central dashboard for my business? Can you be a partner for helping me run my business efficiently and be a growth partner for me? And I usually say this, growth is a 99% margin business. Payments is a sub 1% margin business, which is why any of the advertising companies, you look at the social networks, they operate at 90-95% margin business. So it would be foolish to focus all your energies on the 1% when you have a 99% left. And that's where you can actually make real difference. And every time you grow that person's business, help him be more efficient, help her be more efficient, more successful in their life. And it's simple. How many businesses are service-based? Service-based businesses are majority. Somebody selling cupcakes is service-based. 5 cupcakes left at the end of the day is worth 0. Can you help that person achieve their potential? Help them achieve. And OJX, for example, OJX were earlier sitting at the end of the road waiting for a customer. Now they can go to a customer. The amount of efficiencies which can be brought in by these kind of platforms is where the real economics is. MDR will be, I would say, one of the line items, but anybody who believes that that will be the largest line item is not playing the right game. They need to change the game they're in.
Thank you, Varun. Any comments from Valerie and Take on this topic? Yes. Agree
100%. Violently agree. Yeah, the only addition is, and that's all of that rings true with how we think about payments and the services we're providing to merchants. Payments is one piece of the broader ecosystem, and ultimately what we're trying to do is help them grow their business and manage their business. And Varun gave a lot of good examples about the specific services that help them do so. The other additional piece is really how it extends to financial services. We do today, and we will continue to be able to provide the best financial services to users who can't get access otherwise, or would have to pay way too much. It would cost them too much to access otherwise, because we understand their behaviors and their needs and their risk profile based on the payments behaviors and the payment data. So Tech obviously talked about that in his context, and that is again part of the broader ecosystem of how we grow and thrive as a business. And yes, MDR is one line item, and payments is a critical foundational piece of that overall ecosystem.
Thank you. Go ahead.
It feels like we discussed prior to the call. For everybody on the call today, it's my first time to meet all three of them. But we agree. I agree with what they highlighted earlier. I think it's one of the more important things to look at outside of the MDR space is how you build the stickiness and the engagement of the user. And in so doing, that creates a lot of different other angles to be able to create the profitability for payment businesses like us.
Yeah, sure. And the good news is those levers also make the payments business more sustainable as well. So it's not that payments is a loss leader always, and that these are the other monetization levels. It's that payments may be a loss leader for some time, but as you have, say, a customer who is stickier because they're getting financial services with you, or a merchant who is paying more because you're helping them grow their business, that ultimately, that you don't need to give promotions to that customer anymore because you're serving them best, and so they're always going to choose you for the payment. So it's the line item, the MDR line item gets better and better and better over time because it is part of this other broader ecosystem as well.
Got you. So I think since we are running out of time, last 3-4 minutes are left. Quickly, I just want to get starting with take your comments on how do you see, what are the impediments for adoption of e-payment in the region, and how do you think it can be overcome over the next 3 to 5 years?
It's hard to say what it is in the region. I'll put it in the Philippine context. One of the key things that has been prevalent in the Philippines is there's always a fear of trying something new. We saw this in the telco space when we started to get people to adopt into data, and we've seen it in the digital payment side as well. But it gets to a point where there's an inflection, where that fear of trying something new becomes fear of missing out, and we're hopeful that becomes a critical piece. And we bring it back towards what the social economic tiers in the system look like today. Most of the time, the more affluent are the ones that kind of start to trend and start to adopt earlier. And I think that's one of the key things that we need to unlock. How to transition from making the affluent and the higher tiers adopt towards more mass-based adoption in the country, and that takes a bit of education. That takes a bit of infrastructure building as well. So, those are my takes today.
Valerie, anything from you? What do you see in Indonesia? What are the key impediments?
I think that a real impediment is again, kind of related to the account types or store of value that customers have. If you are, it's the utility of an e-money account and loading money into an e-money account is limited, and compared to the utility of a bank account or the utility of a line of credit. And so if that, just from a pure usability perspective, will always put some throttling on where and when users can pay. Like if they don't have enough balance and they want to make a bigger purchase, they can't use Gopay, right? So it's again opening up as a wallet and supporting more sources of funds so that users can make any payment they want anytime. And there are a lot of I wouldn't say it's impediments, it's just natural hurdles, regulatory, integrating with banks, building out those, both creating and partnering with those financial services that are integrated. So it's just a journey that is very, very complex and will take time. And so I would say the inhibitor is the there's only so much utility in an e-money account, and going beyond that, and then it's just a complex job to get that done. But ultimately, it's what's best for customers and merchants.
Thank you. Varun, any last comments from you on that subject?
I expect us to have much more traction, and hopefully either of them or both of them are listed by the next year, and we'll have a public markets discussion next year when you invite all of us together.
Thank you. I really want to thank everyone for your time today. It was a very insightful session, and thanks for joining us at Credit Suisse ASEAN Conference. For all the participants, I would like to say that please continue. We have next session by various ASEAN analysts detailing the next year outlook for the various markets.